April 1945 in Denmark. The war's final breaths echo across Europe. In Copenhagen, a brutal street battle unfolds around the historic Rosenborg Castle. German forces, ruthless in their occupation, hunt down insurgents, but these aren't the usual local resistance fighters. They are a forgotten fragment of the Hungarian Royal Army, trapped in a desperate struggle against their former German allies. How did these soldiers find themselves thousands of miles from home, fighting a war that was no longer theirs to win, against the very forces they once served? Their tale is an extraordinary blend of reluctant allegiance, clandestine defiance, and a poignant ultimate stand. Far from the inferno of the Eastern and Western fronts, Denmark offered an unexpected sanctuary. Then, an improbable event: the arrival of 12,000 Hungarian soldiers. Once unwilling partners in the German war machine, they were now a lost army, adrift. Their compelling story, their surprising alliances, and their tragic end remained buried in history's shadows for decades. It wasn't until 1992, spurred by his grandfather's forgotten documents, that Danish journalist Esje Ren Peter Eskiter Rensen brought this remarkable narrative to light. The Hungarian soldiers' presence in Denmark wasn't a choice. It was a desperate flight from German-occupied Hungary. Hungary's initial pact with Germany was a cold calculation, born from a desire to reclaim lands lost after the 1920 Treaty of Trianon. This ambition led them down a perilous path, culminating in their catastrophic involvement in Operation Barbarossa and the invasion of the Soviet Union. As the Axis crumbled and the Red Army surged into Hungary, the military situation became untenable. With the Soviets seizing the east and the Germans controlling the west, Budapest became a siege fortress. Desperate for manpower, Germany demanded 4 new Hungarian divisions to battle the Soviets. Yet, with the front closing in, proper military training in Hungary was impossible. The German High Command made a critical decision: relocate these newly formed Hungarian units to a safer training ground. Denmark was chosen, initially as a temporary staging post before deployment to the collapsing fronts. But the Germans harbored deep distrust, viewing Hungarians as inferior and questioning their loyalty. Instead of frontline combat, these soldiers were relegated to low-risk labor, tasked with guarding railways and vital infrastructure. This freed up more seasoned German troops for the desperate battles on the eastern and western fronts. These Hungarians were, in essence, prisoners of a dying empire, forced into foreign service for a cause they no longer believed in, working for an army that held them in contempt. For the Hungarians, arriving in Denmark was a stark contrast to their shattered homeland. They left a country ravaged by war, its cities in ruins, its people starving. Denmark, however, seemed untouched by the war's brutal hand. Houses stood intact, shops were stocked, and its people appeared healthy and well-fed. This jarring reality, coupled with the Germans' ingrained mistrust, shaped the Hungarians' daily lives. Stationed across the country, guarding railway lines between Lyngby and Burkard to prevent sabotage, their non-combat roles were deliberately low stakes. The Germans, so suspicious, armed them with minimal ammunition and placed their barracks under constant guard at night, fearing desertion or revolt. But this very policy of disarming and isolating the Hungarians inadvertently forged an unexpected bond. Their vulnerability created an opening for a unique and fragile alliance with the Danish population. This newfound empathy blossomed into acts of quiet support. Danish students at Holt Gymnasium, for instance, generously shared their packed lunches with the ever-hungry Hungarian soldiers. A bolder form of cooperation emerged: the clandestine trade of weapons for food and cigarettes, facilitated by the Danish resistance. The Hungarian soldiers, fully aware of their precarious situation, were eager to exchange their firearms for essential provisions. The most extraordinary act of this collaboration unfolded on April 26, 1945. When a British bomber was shot down over Ringkøbing Fjord, Hungarian soldiers on night patrol were ordered to capture the Allied airmen and their supplies. Instead, they chose defiance, turning a blind eye. They assisted the Danish resistance in spiriting away the airmen and even helped siphon the plane's fuel for the resistance. To maintain the charade, they helped the Danes pump water back into the fuel tank before the Germans arrived. This wasn't an isolated incident. Hungarian commanders secretly negotiated with the Danish resistance, pledging to fight alongside them against the Germans if a military surrender failed to materialize. In return, they sought assurances that the Danes would protect their families and ensure their safe return home after the war. As the war reached its crescendo, the German leadership grew desperate for any available force. On April 26, 1945, a German order was issued. Hungarian units stationed at Copenhagen's Rosenborg Castle were to be dispatched to the Eastern Front. For these soldiers, it was a death sentence. Rather than face certain doom, they chose rebellion, sparking an armed mutiny. What followed was a surreal and brutal street battle in the heart of Copenhagen. The lightly armed Hungarian soldiers broke from their barracks, scattering into the civilian population, hoping to disappear. This wasn't a calculated attack, but a desperate, spontaneous uprising by men who utterly rejected the German cause. They fought not for ideology, but for their very lives. Gunfire ripped through the streets, the fighting so fierce it made headlines in the local press. The human cost was tragic. 7 Danish civilians caught in the crossfire died. And while the exact number of Hungarian casualties remains unknown, rumors persist of mass executions by the Germans at Kastrup Fortress. This conflict, though small in scale, shattered the relative peace of Denmark's occupation. On May 5, 1945, the German surrender in Denmark brought a wave of jubilation, celebrated by both the Danish people and the Hungarian soldiers. It was a powerful moment of shared relief at the end of a long, brutal conflict. But their joy was short-lived. The British liberators found themselves navigating a tense post-war landscape, managing the volatile relationship between Hungarians and Germans. To avert further bloodshed, they arranged for the Hungarian soldiers to depart a few days after the German forces. Their brief stay, however, left indelible marks on Danish soil. Hungarian carvings can still be found on trees and forests at Hwarvelti in Sealand and Vagel in Jutland, and a museum near Holbæk houses one of the very carriages that carried them to Denmark. Ultimately, the fate of the Hungarians rested in the hands of the Allies, and the outcome was grim. Many who surrendered to the British were first sent to a British prison camp in Germany. Their final destination, however, was Soviet-controlled Hungary. Their destiny was sealed by the Yalta Conference's broader political agreements, which mandated the forced repatriation of all Soviet citizens and members of certain Axis-affiliated armies to the Soviet Union, irrespective of their personal desires. The soldiers on the island of Bornholm, who were directly liberated by the Soviets, faced an especially harsh fate. Nearly all were sent to Soviet prison camps, from which they never returned.